Right here, I got it.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Already we are live.
Okay, I'd like to call to order the May 10, 2023 meeting of the Isle of Palms Planning Commission and acknowledge that the press and public were duly notified in accordance with state law. Our first item on the agenda before we get to talk to our engineer visitors is the approval of our minutes from last week, our last meeting. Any comments or motions?
Motion to approve?
Have a motion to approve. Any second?
Second?
Any discussion? Yeah. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes unanimously. So Douglas, you want to introduce
Yes.
and set up a game, the rules of the game?
Yes, so just for the benefit of the group, we have two respondents here today for the city's sea level adaptation plan request for proposals. We had two proposers, they're both here today. The plan was to have them each do about 15 minutes on their proposal, answer questions from you all for 15 minutes or so. And then we would want for the planning commission, and we could either set another meeting or you all could do it now, for each of you you have a scorecard. We would go through, you all would rank them as you see that they responded to the proposal. We would then, after that process, begin negotiating on costs and the scope and that type of negotiation before you all made a recommendation. If there's not any questions from you all about the process, I would, the request for proposals that was published is in your packet, so I hope each of you has seen that and will be cognizant of that as you're hearing from each of these two engineering firms. And if there's no further questions, the first one on the agenda is Seaman and Whiteside. So if you all are ready, I think they're ready to go.
I'm ready.
All right. All yours.
Not ready for sea level rise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's already here. Too late.
Thanks, Douglas. Appreciate y'all having us here. We're excited to work with the town or city. We love water. We love the landscape. Definitely love Isle of Palms, so we're glad to be here. See if we can.
Oh. Did you get the bad clicker? There it goes.
There we go. So just a real quick introduction on our presentation. Going to try not to get lost in the weeds. Just want to introduce our team, ourselves, and I think it's good for us to start on why. Why do we need to consider sea level rise or sea level change? Why is it important to the city? Why our team thinks it's important? How we're going to actually approach that and help the city develop an adaptation plan that's specific to the city, its residents, their needs, and then maybe some other things that might not be on the forefront, the front of your minds, but it is a planning process. We are talking about many, many years, many decades, so there might be some other things we need to consider, and then we'll wrap it up with some questions and answers. Here today, I'm Ryan Phillips. I'll be representing our team as a project manager if we're awarded the project. Got a heavy water resources background, focus a lot on barrier islands and barrier island hydrology. Done a lot of work, former life on Isle of Palms, done work Sullivan's, Edisto Beach, all the communities in between. So I like spending a day at the beach. Aaron Aiken here with me. Aaron's water resources specialist. He's got a background in stormwater management and instrumentation. So actually collecting the data we can use to make decisions. And then lastly, we've got Whitner Kane. She's a landscape architect by trade, but I think that's an important piece to our community, the city, and how we can figure out how to manage water and what we might do and how that affects the landscape. So try to bring everybody together and really come up with a holistic plan. So the why, why is it important for us to consider sea level change? Well, I think this graphic says a lot. Isle of Palms is surrounded by water, whether it's marsh, it's the intercoastal waterway, the Atlantic Ocean. It is a barrier island. We're surrounded by water, and we need to be conscious of that. And so that's definitely on the, most important thing. Cities traditionally focus on stormwater. We've had a lot of heavy rainfall. That's really been a big issue recently. The city's been working on the phase 1, 2, 3, and 4 projects. I know they're wrapping up a master plan for the phase 4 area, which is really more of the eastern or western side of the island towards Breach Inlet. Thomas and Hutton and their team is working on some of the phase 3 outfall projects. So there's a lot of work going on, but it's really focused a lot on stormwater and rainfall. And so I think this plan's going to shift the paradigm a little bit and really start thinking outside in versus inside out. And lastly, sea level change is happening. It's going up in some places, going down in some places. The projections show it completely going up, and the problem with those is they're linear, and linear models, they never change. They just keep going up. So, we need to think about that and what that might look like for the future. Another big piece, the city hasn't done a sea level plan, but there's folks out there that they're looking at this, they're publishing data online, it's out there. On the left is actually a risk rating for Isle of Palms. 56 out of 57 of the roads are at risk. So there's data out there that people are ingesting, and I think it's important for the city to get in front of that, be able to control the message, be able to do an analysis that's specific to the city. For example, NOAA has sea level rise projections, and they're based on regional models. It's big picture data. It's not very site specific. They do use site specific data, but there are limitations. For example, you have 2nd and 4th Avenue. This is a low-lying area. There's an outfall that discharges there. If you put a check valve on that outfall, you could prevent that little green dot there. So you could prevent the sea level from actually coming in the system. NOAA doesn't know about the outfall. They don't know that you're implementing a check valve program. So you really need boots on the ground, local knowledge to really understand sea level rise and what you can do about it. And then again, being able to inform the residents. We've done our own analysis. We've worked with our team. We've actually engaged people with local knowledge and really put that all into one nice package. So people can't just Google things and come to Planning Commission and tell you ought to do this, that, or the other. So lastly, our friends across the harbor, sea level rise is affecting them every day. Hasn't really affected Isle of Palms too much, but it is starting to a little more, hence some of these outfall improvement projects. And so it's here, it's affecting our community. We need to do something about it. We need to address it. And then really the most important thing, I think, from a city perspective in terms of funding, this document can actually help you work with your bond agencies and financial institutions and help leverage better interest rates. City of Charleston started doing that, and so being able to document that we are doing these things and we're not at risk as much as you think we are, and that can actually help you get a better bond rating, and now you can borrow money to actually implement projects at a much cheaper rate. So it's more than just flooding, it's being able to finance public projects. So like all of this together is pretty important for the community. Again, our team, not going to go through the org chart, but we're broken up into 2 factors. We've got water resources, civil engineering. That's very important. That's your science, and how do we understand the data and what do we do with it? And then we have a land planning perspective. Again, Isle of Palms is home to a lot of folks, a lot of visitors. How does all this affect your hospitality industry? How does it affect your recreational facilities? You've got to tie all that in together, or else you're really not going to have an effective plan. And with that, I'll turn it over to Aaron, and he'll teach us a thing or two.
I'm sure going to try. So now that we understand the why, let's talk a little bit more about the how. We're going to take a three-phase approach to this project. We're going to start with a period of data gathering and information analysis. And that's really going to be, our background data, what's happening, where is it happening, what might happen. And that's what's going to start to feed into our draft plan development, really start to narrow in on what exactly our mitigation strategies can be and what should be pursued. And then working with feedback from the city as well as public and residents, we can start to narrow in on that final plan of development and present an adoption plan that the city can then use in the future years to come to help combat some of the sea level rise. So first off, with the information gathering, we're going to be trying to gather all of the hydrologic and background data required for us to actually look at when and where sea level rise will impact the city. So this is going to include things like previous studies and projects like Ryan previously mentioned. How are these project recommendations from the phase 3 and 4 areas going to impact vulnerability from future sea level rise? We're also going to be looking at a lot of infrastructure data. Where are your roads, buildings, police stations, fire departments? Where's your water and sewer, and how can that be impacted by sea level rise? And we're going to use all of that in addition to a series of sea level rise scenarios, both at a probability and temporal scale. And what I mean by that is NOAA specifically has created these sea level rise scenarios of different rankings. So you can see on the chart on the left, you've got low, intermediate, low, all the way up to high across different temporal scales. Essentially what that means is that the year 2100, there's very low risk but high impact from the high scenario, and the low scenario is probably what's going to happen at a minimum and is your lowest impact scenario. So we want to look across all of those different scenarios when developing a sea level rise adaptation plan to specifically help prioritize and set up a timeline for adoption of the plan. We're also going to be engaging in a lot of public engagement. This is something that we have a lot of expertise in, specifically using web surveys to collect public feedback. We'll be using these to allow the public to give us direct feedback on where they are currently experiencing tidal flooding, when it happened, and most importantly, number 3, provide photo documentation for us. That goes a long way for us to validate a lot of what our recommendations end up being, and allows us to provide the city with documented proof of where flooding is occurring at the end of the process. We're also going to be engaging in stakeholder meetings with residents, business owners, city departments to make sure everyone's voice is heard and helps to shape this final sea level adaptation plan. So this is just preliminary results that we threw together just to start to look at some of the scenarios that we're going to investigate. This was put together using a 2D model, which is what we will be using for the sea level plan. What a 2D model does is it allows us to model water flow over the landscape as it would naturally occur. So if sea level were to rise during a typical tidal cycle, water can then spill out over our roadways into our adjacent properties and start to fill up neighborhoods. And then we can actually start to look at and fine-tune what's happening and where is it happening and under what scenario. So up here in the blue, you see the modeled tidal flooding from a current day scenario, so typical tidal scenario to today. And the additional orange is the additional area that would be flooded under a future tidal scenario with sea level rise. These results are very preliminary, and we'll get much better results if awarded the project as work continues. And really why this is important is this allows us to, as I mentioned, start to fine-tune and narrow in on what's happening and where it's happening. So we can actually begin to look at which structures or facilities or important roads, recreational facilities, you name it, is actually impacted by flooding and to what degree it will actually be impacted by different sea level rise scenarios. So once we have all that information, we can start developing that draft plan. And this is going to include largely both short-term and long-term strategies. Short-term strategies are things that we can do today, these no-regret measures. For example, that can include just installing tide check valves on stormwater outfalls just to prevent that tidal inflow from making its way to the interior of the island and causing sunny day flooding. On the left here, you'll see a couple pictures of where the city actually began installing some of these check valves on 25th Avenue to try to solve some of its tidal flooding issues. And then these long-term strategies are going to be our larger infrastructure improvement projects. Your $10, $20 million projects where you are implementing, larger stormwater drainage, embankments, check valves, you name it, to try to address sea level rise. And then we're also going to be looking at different changes that the city can make to its regulations and city ordinances from a land developer perspective that can allow the public, that can allow this public-private partnership to have the developers have some say in how they can actually address sea level rise when they are redeveloping a property. Whitner is actually going to speak a little bit more to that here in a second, as well as some of these dual purpose solutions. And finally, and most importantly, we don't want to just give you a roadmap with no way to pay for it. So something that we actually have a good deal of expertise in is helping to identify funding pathways for actual project implementation, so that when we get to the end of this process, we can say, okay, these are the areas you need to prioritize first, and this is how you're going to get it done. And I'll let Whitner take it over from there.
Thank you. So where the landscape architecture side comes in is we want to take a holistic approach to any solutions that we decide are necessary. So not just fix the problem, but let's fix it and help it enhance the experience of the homeowner and the people who are coming to visit the owl palms. Oh, I'm
Just
sorry.
pull it down. You can pull it down. Yeah, just want to make
Sorry,
sure YouTube gets you.
I'm a lot shorter. So one of the things we want to do is when the scenarios are run and we have a good idea of where good locations are to implement these adjustments, we want to take a very holistic approach to the land planning side, look at how we can combine it with what the Isle of Palms needs from a homeowner and a visitor, a tourist perspective. We want to encourage public-private partnerships where possible, dual-use projects, so that we're really digging into what the community needs and they can see on top of the ground and make sure that what's going on underneath is benefiting everyone. There's a lot of ways we can do that. Some are very visible, some are not. We've got a couple listed up here, marsh management plans. Plantings become really critical and important, especially with areas that are going to plan to receive inundation. We want to make sure that the plantings can survive and actually help us. Living shorelines, dune protection, and then some non-physical ways of helping out the community, which may be some zoning changes, maybe some planning ordinances. We might look at doing some elevation-based building code analysis where some areas you can build in, but we want to make it a little bit higher so that it's not causing problems for someone else. Did I hit this button? Okay. Finally, this would kind of be our process as we move through. We will compile the results. We will have our meetings. We'll get the public input. We would develop a report looking at strategies, cost estimates, funding options, and then come in and help build the roadmap for what we do with what comes out of item 1 and item 2. And we really want to we hope to get really good public input so that we can build a consensus, we can build support, and then really encourage people to be part of the process, because they're going to be the ones end up using it. We want them to feel like they're part of the process and that we can get good buy-in from them. So I think
All right. Hopefully we didn't bore you too much, but just closing up again, it's your community. So we want to take the science we understand, our expertise, and focus on that. We don't want to be biased. We don't want to get into the politics. We're here to focus on the science and help you figure out what your community needs. Again, it's your community. So you live here, you work here. This is home for you, and it's home to a lot of other folks that visit maybe for a week. And so we've got to think about them and what is really important to their lifestyle and their future generations. Again, like Whitner mentioned, we've got to tie this all together, big picture. I mean, we can't just get hyper focused on rigid civil engineering solutions. We've got to think about future development or redevelopment of properties. We've got to think about how we could tie in recreational facilities. I know there's a lot of concerns, traffic, parking. How could we bring all of that together and bundle it in one big package and get a lot of money from the government, hopefully, and fix it all at once? We don't want to just do one little thing here, one little thing there, and then look back and say, man, we really could have just done this all at once. It would have been much cheaper, much faster, and better on everybody's mental health. So again, multidisciplined approach. We're not just going to look at it from an engineering perspective. We're going to look at it from a land planning perspective and just from human perspective. I mean, we're people. Engineers are kind of dry. We do calculations, and yep, that's what the calculation says, but you need to look back and actually think about what the computer system says. Garbage in is garbage out. So think about what you're doing. And then lastly, the funding. I know Aaron mentioned a little bit on the funding. There's a lot of funding out there that's available. There's a lot of existing funding that people don't even know about. And so, we're here to help you and help navigate those channels and figure out ways to finance things. And it may be the city is in a great financial spot and they don't need any funding, but we still want to give you some options so that if you did want to address traffic or you did want to address recreational needs, there's money available that you could address that with the stormwater. And so really, again, just thinking big picture. And with that, we'll open it up for questions.
Have you done any sea level studies? And I didn't see any in the resumes.
Seaman and Whiteside has not. In my former life, I have done a lot of work with the City of Charleston and other coastal communities, but not at Seaman Whiteside.
I would just ask, Ryan, if you, so I think part of this process eventually will come to reviewing the scope and potentially a cost for that, to cover that scope. Have you, in your team's estimation, have you all talked about if the scope, in your opinion, is too narrow, is too broad? Do you all feel like it would produce a meaningful, useful document at the end of it, or did you see kind of superfluous things that maybe weren't necessary? Did you have an opinion on what was requested of you in terms of its usefulness going forward?
I think everything that you have is useful. Everything that we presented, definitely within the budget the city has. I do think there are other things that could be done. I know we've got some coastal scientists here. We're not planning to develop coastal models and look at hurricanes. So there are other things you could add on top of that, but I think.
So if anything, you would say the scope should be potentially expanded.
Yeah.
If that was going to be a route to go, expand the scope.
Yeah. I mean, our goal is to take what data is out there, use it, take the local data that we can get from the city, Charleston County LIDAR, use that with projections. We're going to develop models, so we're not just going to take sea level rise projection from NOAA. So we're going to build a model, see what gets flooded, and then you can take all those layers in GIS. You can take your building footprint layers, you can take your road layers. All of that is publicly available. This is actually a building footprint layer that FEMA uses when they look at FEMA claims. It's a national structure data set. So our plan is really going to be heavy GIS, almost like a layer cake. You take all this data, figure out at what year and what scenario might you have vulnerable facilities, and I think that's a good start. With the budget the city has, you don't go to the doctor and have open heart surgery. You like to do a test. Let me check my blood pressure. Let me see if I have a low blood sugar, and then you want to go in for open heart surgery. So I think it's good for the city to take a, layer by layer approach and not just dump $1 million into just looking at a whole lot of data and collecting information that may or may not be valuable.
Okay.
That's my perspective.
One more quick question. I feel like I put you on the spot with, have you done any? Are you aware, and I think the city of Charleston has done some sea level rise studies. Are you aware of other studies? Because I don't think there are many out there kind of at the level where we're kind of going in at the entry level, and I don't know who else has them in South Carolina at this point.
City of Beaufort, Edisto Beach just finished one. Both of theirs were done by the Sea Grant. So they got money through the Sea Grant and worked with College of Charleston, Dr. Norm Levine. He's a coastal hazards guy. He's a heavy GIS person. So Sea Grant has funding that they've used for Edisto Beach and Beaufort, and they've started with a very high level, and I mean very high level analysis. And so that's kind of the big thing. I know Kiowa has done a lot. They actually have a draft sea level rise plan out there right now. One of our colleagues, her husband works for DNR. He's a coastal scientist, and he's worked with them. So Kiowa is probably, I'd say they're at the forefront. Their document's like 160 pages. We're not saying we're going to produce that, but they've done it. Let's see. I'm sure there's others that have looked at it, but I'm not intimately familiar with any others.
Oh, great, thank you.
Just from some background, is it worthwhile pursuing a plan to respect or address rising seas? How long have the seas been rising and why? The shore used to be outside of Columbia, then it retreated. I mean, where's that water go? And is this something that's been tracking? I drank it. How long has this tracking of sea rise been occurring? And then we go and change the geodetic data, so grade just dropped a foot, roughly. And that would certainly make sea rise seem a lot worse than it could be unless that's factored in to all that discussion. And I'm just curious from just the perspective of, is this really something to be concerned about, or might we just have a retreat in 2 years and before you know it, we're...
Yeah.
And also, just as an aside, I live on 42nd Avenue. I've lived out there for 20 years, had the land longer than that. There used to be a rock revetment or groin out there. And at low tide, the rocks were 3 feet high. Of course, we've had 3 beach renourishments since then. Those rocks are still there, but you're not going to see them. So they're buried by an elevation at the beach much higher than it ever was. So I'm confused by that. And of course, the other end of the island is certainly washing away. But
No, I'm completely there with you. I don't think the city needs to make any rash claims or put anything out there to the public that says
we're not needing bulkhead like
this.
Yeah.
It's
The
probability.
red line's the bulkhead,
I mean, that's hydrology.
or
Yeah.
a berm?
It's all statistics.
Yeah.
You know, we can estimate anything, and then we can say, well, here's our confidence interval. It might happen, it might not. You might drive to the store and die, you know. So cars are dangerous.
Yeah.
But our goal would be to look at some reasonable scenarios. I mean, all of the scientists in the entire world, they've come together as a sea level rise task force committee. And the consensus is there's going to be some rise. None of them will all agree how much. And so I think our goal is just to look at, okay, what do we think is reasonable? What might that look like? And let's do something. And it's not going to be build an entire perimeter protection along the intercoastal waterway. It's going to be, what do we do right now for, I think, elevated tidal flooding? I mean, Aaron's collected data at the marina. I know Nicole Elko has been collecting data. So we can look at that and see what's a realistic tide. You know, what might a storm surge look like? And then, you know, there's nothing that says we have to take an Army Corps document or a NOAA document and say, this is what they said, so we're going to use this. But what is important, I think, if I can operate this clicker, is make a plan, collect data, in 5 years, see what it looks like. You can come back to the plan and you can say, well, you know what? We thought it was going to be this. Maybe it went down. And then revisit the plan. So that this is not a static document. I think it needs to be dynamic, and I think it needs to be progressively evaluated, and don't act irrational, because it could create havoc in the community, and then you could spend a ton of money and then never really know what for.
Thank you.
So that's kind of the 30-minute block that we had allotted. So if everybody's good, we ready to go to the next proposal?
Yes, please.
Okay. Thank you all.
Yep.
I appreciate that. We'll, welcome to stay, and we'll.
Ask questions.
Yeah.
You might have better questions.
Yeah. So next on the agenda is Weston and Sampson, and you will also have a copy of their proposal. So with that, I'll hand it over. Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone, for having us. My name is Lucas Hernandez. I'm a resilience specialist with Weston and Sampson Engineers. I've been with Weston and Sampson for a little over a year now, and prior to joining Weston and Sampson, I worked on Kiowa Island as a resilience specialist. So I was involved with the sea level rise adaptation plan and the adaptive management plan that sort of followed shortly after. I deal a lot with coastal hydrology, drainage systems, hydrologic modeling, and planning as well. So just quickly, I wanted to introduce myself.
Hey, I'm Stephen Trainum, President of Coastal Science and Engineering. We have been handling the beach management services for the city since 2007, I believe. I've been involved with every project since then. Our company's been around since '84, working up and down the state, actually up and down the East Coast for coastal management projects, beach restoration, resilience projects on the coast, moving sand around and doing that kind of work. So it's a pleasure to be here with you.
So just to get into our presentation today, what we wanted to take the opportunity to do is just introduce ourselves, show a little bit of our experience in planning, coastal management, modeling, and then share with you our vision for the IOP plan. Also at the end, we do have a brief section on some potential funding sources as well.
Lucas, can you make sure you're on the microphone? Thank you.
Sorry.
That's
Thank you. To begin with, we just wanted to quickly discuss why we decided to become teaming partners on this proposal. Weston and Sampson and CSE reached out to each other shortly after we found the RFP and decided that we would be a good team. CSE with their local expertise, all the work that they've been doing for y'all's beaches over the past several years, emergency management experience, and then our bread and butter at Weston and Sampson has really been vulnerability and risk assessments. So I don't know if you've had any.
Yeah, no, just look forward to the opportunity. I feel like our firms complemented each other well, where we're really good on the data collection analysis. We've been looking at sea level rise at Isle of Palms for a while, and what we lack is that expertise in the infrastructure part and the kind of the flooding part of that. So I thought it was a good teaming opportunity.
So with us today, we've got 4 folks. Myself and Stephen have already introduced ourselves, but we also have Jeannie Lewis. Jeannie has been working as coastal management for, I don't want to say a long time. But Jeannie has been in Virginia, has been in South Carolina and Georgia as well. She's been a great addition to the team, and she does a lot of our work in the front end with resiliency and permitting and design solutions. And things of that nature. And then also Anna Kimmelblatt is here. She just came to us recently from Charleston County as a floodplain manager. So these are the folks that we have in the room today. A little bit of background on Weston and Sampson. So our firm is spread across the East Coast, as you can see. We've got office locations in Florida, Georgia, or we've got temporary offices in Georgia and Pennsylvania. We've got South Carolina offices, North Carolina, and Virginia, just in the southeast. But 3 offices, with our office being located right off Leeds Avenue in North Charleston. And then on the side there, you can also see some of the services we provide. We're a multidisciplinary firm. We've been in operation for over 120 years. And we've decided that as a firm, we needed to view more projects with this lens of resiliency. So everything in our office prior to our joining has been a lot of wastewater work. And we've come in, tried to go in on the front end, understand what goes into wastewater, what goes into these drainage projects, and how to make better solutions that last longer. So that's been the work that we've conducted so far. So the team that we bring to you will consist of resilience specialists, coastal resource experts, community planners, beach management specialists, visualization specialists, engagement innovators, modeling experts, and floodplain managers. Speaking a little bit more to some of the multidisciplinary work that we do, again, in just the resiliency group, we have our own engineers, we have our own LAs, we've got our own modeling team. And what we try to do, again, is build in resilience to everything that we do. We want that in our vulnerability risk assessments, obviously. We want those in planning. We want to create adaptive and long-term solutions. So moving into planning. In the last 5 years, we have completed over 30 resilience plans, 25 hazard mitigation plans, 10 master plans, 50 watershed management plans, and 14 resilient stormwater plans. One of our current projects right now is with Charleston County, so we are working with them to update their hazard mitigation plan. A lot of the information from here will be going into that plan as well. So what we're helping them with is with that coordination of the 17 jurisdictions. It's a lot of engagement, heavy lift and engagement effort for that part of the project. And then also we're updating all their information to meet the regulations from FEMA for the new climate change requirements. Oop. And then a little bit about the Kiowa Island Sea Level Rise Adaptation Plan. This is work from my previous employer, which was on Kiowa Island. This was a large endeavor. The report ended up having over 200 prioritized recommendations, one of which was to create an adaptive management plan. So that work, instead of just providing a document that would be left on the table, we wanted to create something that would be a living document that they could look at, see, check when they've met a threshold or a tipping point. Maybe it's a flooded road. Maybe it's a road flooded for a certain time period. Maybe it's to a certain depth. We looked at all of those things to determine when action should be taken, because we understood that when you follow these curves, there's sort of you go from intermediate low to an intermediate high. So you've got this band of elevations that the water level could be at. That makes it very hard to decide what you want to do at any given point in time with that level of uncertainty. So what we wanted to provide the decision makers of the island with was a better way to track what's happening, where we're seeing inundation, where we're seeing things like marsh migration. Study those items and make better decisions later on down the road.
I'll keep our part fairly short here, but our company, again, has been around since 1984, working along almost every developed beach in South Carolina and several in Georgia, North Carolina, all the way up to Long Island. We were actually involved in the first sea level rise study in the 80s for Charleston. Our founder, who's still with us and working, was part of that effort. But our approach for any community, and Isle of Palms is certainly one of those, is to develop a long-term strategy for beach management. And that, I think, ties into this overall plan for a sea level rise. Is, your beach is your most visible part of your island. That's why most of the residents live here, most of your visitors come. And it's certainly, to this date, has probably been one of your most significant financial investments into protect that beach in the face of sea level rise. Mr. Denton, you were asking about how sea levels have risen recently, and it's something that we do track. And for the past 100 years, sea level has risen about a foot. Whether it's accelerating or not, that's the biggest question, and we're trying to keep track of that, and I'll show a slide here in a second. But we've been able to protect the beaches of the state and actually improve the condition of the beaches in this state over the past 30 years, despite sea level rise. So what we're trying to look at is, if this rate accelerates or sand supplies are starting to be diminished, how can communities adapt to that? Excuse me, what are their funding strategies to find additional sand, place that sand on the beach, or manipulate sand that's in the system to keep a beach healthy? One example is Seabrook Island, where we relocated Captain Sam's Inlet between Kiowa and Seabrook. That was a highly successful project that's been nationally recognized, and they've done that project 3 times now, transitioning that beach from a eroded, armored shoreline to the picture on the right there. You can see there's almost a maritime forest protecting houses and offering plenty of beach space now. Another recent project that we just completed this past year was Debadoo Beach, and I'm sure you're probably familiar with that and the controversy there. But we developed a 30-year long-range beach management plan for them, and that included installation of 3 groins to help maintain the sand that was placed on the beach. They've had repetitive beach nourishment efforts that last 2 to 3 years before the seawall's exposed, and they understood that's not economically feasible to sustain that. So they hired us specifically because they felt comfortable with us being able to help them navigate through the known, legal and environmental challenges that they were going to face implementing this groin and nourishment project. So we spent a couple of years getting permits, going through those challenges, and working with stakeholders from within the community, within the NGO groups, within the permitting agencies, and even within the Baruch Institute Research Center that's just south of there to get this project built. And it's been very successful, held up very well during Hurricane Ian. And finally, here at Isle of Palms, again, we've been working since 2007, developed a long-range plan that's turned into regular funding. The Isle of Palms led the effort to have the beach preservation fee passed in the legislature, so that's provided a stable source of income to fund these projects, teaming with Wild Dunes and the state in public access areas. We have annual surveys that will help give us existing data to tie into the sea level rise study, including what sea level rise is going to look like on the beach, help coordinate FEMA and state cost sharing. And what we've done the past 2 years, and we've kind of done this on our own, it's outside the scope of our work, but we thought it was critically important, was to actually start looking at flooding vulnerability and sea level rise specifically for Isle of Palms. And this is a very kind of introductory level effort, but we're looking at water levels in Charleston Harbor every year now, looking at weather conditions, wind roses, and trying to just start building a database of how your environmental forcing and sea level rise is actually changing here. So we're starting to plot that, and we're looking for that uptick in sea level rise, and if it happens. And one of the biggest things with sea level rise that I think a community needs to understand when developing these plans is you look at these charts and you look at these flooding maps and you see, okay, there's this big covered area of water. That's happening 30 years from now. But it's very important to understand that you have 30 years, if that's the scenario that actually happens, you have 30 years worth of time where incrementally every day that's getting a little worse. So it's not going to be all of a sudden you're flooded. It's going to be things that kind of reveal themselves over time. So every year you're looking at, is this projection that we're estimating actually meeting what's happening in the real world? And we're making adjustments on that. And then you throw the idea of a storm on top of that. A storm completely changes everything. How do we respond to that storm event, and how are these vulnerable areas identified in this plan that we can give residents a tool to have information on the front end so they know whether they need to evacuate. They know, do I need to move my golf cart up? Because we've had a couple of places they leave the golf carts, they get flooded, they start a fire, they burn a house down. So that kind of information is what we're looking to provide for this study.
Moving into the modeling section, I just quickly wanted to show you all that Weston & Sampson has a lot of experience with different types of hydrologic models. We understand that there's currently a drainage master plan that's being worked through. So in here, we've got the ability to take the existing model from that master plan and update it to include things like sea level rise or future projections for rainfall. On the right there, you can see we've got, well, what we've got there is Church Creek Basin. So if you're not familiar, that's over in West Ashley around Shadow Moss. It's a very well-known area for flooding, and we've been working in the area for a while now. I think when we took over part of the model, we ended up splitting it into about 6 basins that we've been doing work in. And in the different areas of the model, we've tried to incorporate both green and gray solutions. So the top line there you see in proposed solutions, we've got things like rain gardens, constructed wetlands, stream restabilization. We've also got things like upsizing of culverts, which is a very quick solution to a lot of the issues that we've seen in there. But then we've also got some stuff like the tide check valves and automated tide gates that I can show you a little bit more about earlier, or in this slide here, sorry. So this slide is actually the very bottom portion of the Church Creek watershed, and it feeds out under Highway 17 into the Stono River. And what you're looking at are an existing condition model on your left, and on the right you're looking at a proposed condition model. So what we're able to do is take into account sea level rise, different scenarios of rainfall, with the existing condition and with whatever proposed solutions we would like. And then the top right-hand side, you can see a table there that shows the benefits in the project. So what we've got there is the number of building footprints that have been inundated in the proposed condition versus existing. Same with roadways, all things that I believe you all are looking for this plan as well. So moving on, our vision for Isle of Palms. So moving into the plan, the vision for the plan that we have, we feel that public engagement is going to be critical. It was absolutely critical on Kiowa when we were working through getting the right folks at the table, making sure that each of the entities, Kiowa has a very interesting governance structure, so making sure all of the entities that needed to be there were there, able to understand everyone's role and how they could best collaborate. So we're hoping for the same here. That drives right into phase 1, which is selecting the scenario. I think like it was mentioned before, we can provide the NOAA sea level rise scenarios. There was a recent update just last year to the values for the Charleston area, but we understand that there needs to be more of a centric scenario that's applied. And I think you all have installed a Hohonu tide gauge from Nicole Elko. So it's collecting information. I looked it up earlier, and I think having those island-specific sources of information are critical. So again, going into that phase 1 is working with you all to choose what scenarios that you want to see and what time horizons that you want to look at, and then moving into that vulnerability and risk assessment. And again, I think that's where public engagement comes into play, is we're looking for information from all over about where your critical vulnerable areas are. So the community is a great resource for that. And so is the staff from the island. They're the ones getting the calls. They're the ones that are seeing this in the forefront. So actually, I've had property owners on Kiowa know exactly what time of day something is going to come out of the drain. So that experience is invaluable. Also, we want to look at identifying what tipping point there is between time horizons from asset to asset. It may make more sense to repair drainage than it is to raise multiple buildings on a road. Those are type of things that we want to look through that vulnerability and risk assessment. And then finally, we want to help you all develop adaptation strategies. So something that you can work with that's going to be adaptive in the future, not just a plan that you're going to have and sit on the table. We want to provide you something that's a living document. Do you want to cover public engagement?
Yeah, I just, we really think that the public engagement portion of this is obviously critical. You know, we want a plan that the public supports, but we also understand that, especially with a plan like this, it's not something that you go out to the public and say, give us everything you've got in everybody's opinion, because we'll never get to a consensus on a path forward. And I know you've been involved with projects like that. So we think it's important to first kind of get a select group of stakeholders where you know, these are the folks that are either well-versed in this, dealing with this every day, and say, what are our most vulnerable spots? And really, where do we want this plan to go? What direction do we want to head? And especially picking a scenario that we want to evaluate in detail. Using that information to start preparing a directed plan that we can present to the public for feedback on that plan. So we're really leading the public in a direction that we feel is beneficial to the city while meeting their needs, while somewhat keeping it constrained where we're not going in 38 different directions that ends up not really giving us a usable document. We're really looking to give the city usable tools and a usable document that they can implement projects rather than a 3-inch binder of a report that goes on the shelf and say, look what we did. So we think that's very important. Obviously, what Lucas was mentioning with the data gathering and the local knowledge there that I'm sure you're very familiar with. But we do want to keep the public very engaged, working with, and I know it's going to involve working closely with Wild Dunes and the city. I've got a lot of experience with that from our beach projects, working with the agencies that are involved in permitting and working in sensitive areas such as marsh and things like that. It requires a lot of coordination with NGOs and things like that. So that's going to be a big part of this, and we're ready to meet that challenge.
So Matt, this is the first tool. So sort of leading into that public engagement a little bit more, this is one of the tools that we've been using for Fripp
Lucas.
Island. Sorry, I'm dancing away
I
from
know,
the
I
mic.
appreciate
This is one of the public tools that we've been using to gather information for Fripp Island. So one of the projects that we're working on right now with them is a stormwater master plan, and we need information from the public about where they're seeing flooding. In this application here, folks are able to drop in pins where they've seen the flooding. They're able to drop in photographs, describe the time that the event happened so that we can go back later and see if it was a tidal or a rainfall-induced event. But this has been a great tool for us also for model validation. So we're able to go in and build any sort of model we want, right? But we want to be able to make sure that what we're showing in the model is accurate to real life. So that's one of the more invaluable things that
We
we've
can
got.
see it back here, we're just not sure why it's not.
Okay.
Like you click the link at the top and we are in Fripp Island.
No dice.
Might be presenting on the
Yeah.
It's, I don't know if I have that.
I guess while she's looking at that, are there any questions we want to entertain? Give her a second to look at that. Or Douglas, would you rather us wait till the end?
I would say wait unless something specific at this point.
we can move forward too. It's not a problem. Because the links are there, and we'll leave y'all with a copy as well, if you want to play with some of these. Let's see. Oh. Uh-oh. That's our fault. All right. I'll get us back. All right. So, moving into sort of the modeling outputs, we do plan that there's going to be a pretty heavy modeling effort here. A lot of what you see for the NOAA sea level rise viewer are what are known as bathtub models. So there's and the short way to explain what that is there's no hydrologic connectivity between any of the waterways around the island. So that's why you get those green areas that pop up in the tool. Those are areas of uncertainty until the water level gets higher, then they eventually turn blue. What we want to provide is more of a 2D overland flow model that would be adapted with different levels of sea level rise and rainfall. And one of the outputs for one of those models will be this level of exposure. So what we mean here by exposure is a combined effect. So we're looking at sea level rise, we're looking at storms, the effect of storms, we're looking at flooding from rainfall, and all of those are compiled together to give a total exposure score. And what we've got here, this output is from a community up north, and we ended up having about 724 assets that we compiled, and you can see in the graph there that on each time horizon, you can see how many number of assets there are in each level of exposure, so from high all the way to none. And to accompany that, now specific to Isle of Palms, what we've got here is one of those quick bathtub type models. And the green that you're seeing there is the building footprints layer. And you can see, I'm going to step away from the mic really quickly. The orange points on the map are all building footprints that have been inundated under that 2050 sea level rise scenario. So this is also what we envision on providing not just the graphing sort of summary of inundated facilities, but we're also looking at providing maps that can accompany those. This is another tool that we wanted to show you all, Isle of Palms specific, but I think we'll just show the graphic. Yeah. So this one is essentially you can go in, navigate, and pan around the island. It'll allow you to get down to the parcel level to see inundation. What we've got turned on right now are those NOAA sea level rise values, and you can see that green area toward the right-hand side of the image. Again, that's that area of uncertainty, if you will. So we're hoping to be able to update these maps with the time horizons that you all decide on, and then and then have them mapped as well. Also, you can see there's two or three icons there, so we're able to put in information like police stations or medical facilities and evacuation routes in here as well. Along the top, there are additional layers for current weather and NextRad radar. So this can be built however is needed for the town. We actually envisioned for the city, this is actually one of the tools that we envisioned leaving with you all so that you have a tool during those emergency management situations where you're looking for quick information to provide the public. They can look at that information on their own through a link like this. And then finally, we're hoping to work together to create a sea level rise adaptation for you all that will result in tangible, accessible, and equitable actions. Again, I think we've harped on this a couple times in the presentation, but we don't want to leave you with something that's going to sit on a shelf. We envision a living document that's updated. We envision tools for the community to use and to actively engage with during the process of planning. And that way we can preserve the way of life on Isle of Palms. And then lastly here, just a couple slides on funding sources for mitigation efforts. We've got, in the past 5 years, around $9 million in grant funding for resilience projects, over 100 climate resiliency projects complete. So just a little quick overview of funding over the last 5 years. And then some specific sources of funding that we thought would be available to you all are from South Carolina Office of Resilience for resilience planning and disaster and risk analysis. Those applications, again, are accepted year-round on an ongoing basis, and you all are an eligible applicant. So with that, I think we're ready to take questions.
All right, if nobody else, I guess I'll ask the same question about the scope as it was published. Do you all have a feeling as to whether or not that's an adequate scope, it's an inadequate scope, or are there things that you would change about it? Just kind of generally your reaction to what we've asked for you all to give us. Do you feel like it would produce a useful document and plan going forward? Just your general impressions about that.
I do think so. Similar to what Ryan mentioned, I do believe that what you've got in the scope of work is great. I think it's just a matter of what ways is the information going to be displayed at the end, and how is the community going to be involved throughout the process. I think it are two things that we've pointed out that were particularly important to us. I don't know if you had any more.
Yeah, I think the scope is good. Like I mentioned earlier, having a focused approach on the plan where we're not evaluating scenarios that we don't feel are realistic at all, or we're not, again, before you look at 100 years, let's look at 50 years and start tracking, are we meeting that? The difference between, say we're looking at 2050, if we're looking at 6 inches of sea level rise by then, or if we're looking at 3 feet, that's a completely different conversation that we're having. 3 feet of sea level rise in the next 30 years is, something where a plan like this kind of goes out the window. And let's focus on what's realistic and work towards that change as we're seeing it. The other thing that maybe would be, it wasn't specifically called out, but tying in the emergency preparedness or disaster occurrences with this plan, they kind of go hand in hand in some ways, where we're looking at flooding, we're looking at inundation. So for example, if there is a storm event coming, a tool like this could help identify what roads are going to be flooded first that may impact an evacuation route. So you could zoom in on a tool like this if you're a homeowner and say, if I do need to evacuate at the last minute, I can't go left, I need to go right because this road's probably going to be flooded. Looking at things like that, I think could be a nice addition to this type of scope.
And I will mention as well as working through the sea level rise adaptation plan for Kiowa, that document had tons of recommendations. And it was a very overwhelming document to, I guess, not only digest, but understand where to start. So I think it's important to have those short-term goals. I think it's important to have long-term goals, but I think it's incredibly important to have a way to track where you're at in each of those short-term and long-term goals, because it's easy for the plan to be written and it to be lost. Going through after, I believe the final draft of the plan was submitted in 2017, and it took another 3 years before we went through the adaptive management planning process. So it was, in that 3-year time, a lot of things happen in communities, and it's easy to lose focus. So, that's why I've been really wanting to harp on that living document piece of this, to keep the community involved and keep it in the forefront.
It's tough to do.
It is.
We ton of projects that we struggle with that. I mean, it's just in keeping momentum and engagement's challenging. So I think we appreciate both of you, both groups coming today, and I think at that we will kind of talk. The commission, you all are welcome to stay and listen to that, but there'll be they have some decision-making about their next steps that will be next, and then we'll carry on with our regular business. So that, I think you all, your next task will be to basically assign scores to each proposal, and, occasionally you all will do it now at the meeting, or you could go back, take some time, reread the scope, reevaluate the proposals, the written proposals that you have. So you can do it either way, but from my perspective, what I will need is those scorecards back so we can then start talking back with the firms about cost and next steps forward with them. I think a question that's been in my mind at least is whether or not this process would tell us that the scope was too far-reaching, too narrow. I don't know if I guess I get a sense that we feel like that proposers at least feel comfortable that the scope was useful and probably about at the appropriate level. So with your next steps of grading, you want to do that now, or do you want to, you could do it later, whichever you want.
Can I turn mine in?
Got one is ready.
Damn,
I'm ready.
quick test taker.
It's up to you all. I would not want to delay too much, so I guess if your preference was to do it at a subsequent meeting, I would ask that we do that fairly quickly to just keep the process moving along.
Yeah, the icebergs in Greenville. The icebergs in Greenland are heading this way.
Gotta do it
Caramel
tonight
syrup.
then.
So then there's
Sandy says-
Boyle's Law. I think it's Boyle's Law, the ice cube in the glass. The ice cube melts, the glass doesn't spill over. So it has to be a glacier to get anywhere close to causing sea level. I'm an amateur,
Send it to California.
I think about this stuff while I'm having that martini and
Watching your ice melt.
watch my ice melt.
I was gonna airlift a couple of pieces of the glacier into Lake Mead and just drop it.
But I'm satisfied with the responses. And, let me ask just a general question. This is not to either one of you, but it's trying to understand what this plan is trying to achieve. Is it more of an adaptation to a situation that we have no control over, or is it something that we're trying to combat? And I would take the battery project as being a combat. Whereas we might be talking more, if they was talking about raising structures or something, that we just, walking through the puddle and lifting up our pant legs to not, make our pants get wet. Is that that's more of a reasonable response, especially when you're looking at if sea rise is a foot in 100 years, we're talking about smaller incremental things, and what you don't want to do is get caught at the end, being short-sighted. But,
Both. I
Yeah.
think, like 25th Avenue,
right.
definitely low, right on the intercoastal. Call our friends at DOT and get them to help us install some piping, berm, rock, easy fix. Cities
Yeah.
didn't have too much pain implementing that, but I think you need to, that's your first step, like, hey, what's flooded today, let's fix that.
Right.
And then you start thinking about, what if it did happen? Because you can't go in denial and say it won't happen. It might happen, and what does that look like? And that's where Stephen was mentioning, let's not get too far in the future and come up with something crazy and, again, act a little
Well,
rational.
You're right.
One of the things that I keep thinking about is something that council has done in recent history. They've put a limit on how much fill you can put on a lot. And I find that very myopic for, I understand the process is you don't want runoff into your low-lying neighbor's lot. You know, if you put 4 feet of fill in, or the current allowed is up to 1 foot, if I'm not mistaken.
Above the road.
Perhaps this would come in, a study may come in, and that we need to revisit that, to y'all's point, in 5 years or 10 years for maybe allowing some of the inundation that is currently happening, such as 25th Avenue, right here at Breach Inlet, that house on that triangle floods more than I ever remember. We all know where the spots are. Maybe we need to be looking more liberally at allowing some additional fill or raising of the roads, to your point. I think that there is a program that we are exploring, if it's not in process, of armoring the sidewalk down Waterway Boulevard.
Elevating it.
Elevating it,
Kind of creating a seal along the back.
a berm of sorts, yeah.
That's what I was gonna say, is that part of it's just kind of having the mindset in the back of your head that if we're planning out projects over the next 10 or 20 years, whether it's, road paving, if we're gonna pave a road, does it make sense to elevate that road 6 inches? So that you're maximizing, being efficient when you're doing the, construction projects.
As here we are now doing all this drainage stuff. Thankfully, I think that's more of a complementary effort to this than something that's in conflict.
The problem is when you get, if we're talking, 2 or 3 feet of rise relatively quickly, you've lost the ability to drain anywhere, because
Right.
You're only 2 or 3 feet above your water level now. So
And that is that is exactly how that path elevation came about. The money was getting put into the budget to redo it, to reconstruct it. And, it was just thought about in terms of that being the back rim, basically, of the island. And wouldn't it make sense while we're doing that, while we're spending that money, to elevate it and let water get through it to some degree? So,
That's where, like Forest Trails, they're converting that channel salt to fresh water. That's where green infrastructure like that, you actually excavate the fill, the fluff mud. I've walked into it and fallen to my shoulders.
I've got a picture.
You could, excavate and preserving that area so that if sea level rise did happen, water has somewhere to go. So there's other interior drainage that can help. It's already there. Like
Right.
it just needs to be sprucing up a little bit.
To kind of piggyback on that comment, within a lot of those drainage improvement studies, sea level rise and future climate scenarios were looked at to a certain degree, so that when you're implementing some of these drainage improvements, I can only really speak to the west of 29th to Breach Inlet area, that kind of looking at it in a former life. But the goal was that when you do some of those drainage improvement projects, how do you prevent future sea level rise from backflowing into the interior of the island and causing a lot of that sunken flooding?
We are all learning to live with water in many different facets, and thinking about multi-purpose, as we've heard today, like having parks that double duty as stormwater management idea, like, receptors, adding capacity, like you just heard. It's a challenge, but you've got a lot of people thinking about this now. It is the right time to be embarking.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
all right, grade now or grade later? I've got one maybe two.
I'm done.
You done?
We'll leave the room.
I didn't know if we wanted to.
And we'll,
So you
if you leave,
run
we'll be
off and
back.
watch it on
I didn't put my
YouTube
head
because
on.
it's so exciting and riveting.
Do I need to?
So if you want to,
I think I spelled it names, right?
Have to,
I've got,
tall guys out. Yeah, Lucas, I didn't know you swapped over. I hadn't seen this
We
at
have
the beach
him.
conference.
I didn't know if we were going to.
She handed it
I
to,
or-
I know, she gave Ron passwords. Do you want me to do some quick math, help you with anything?
So I think you tossed that
That's
point,
automatic.
actually, pretty for the most part.
Pretty well, as far as I've heard.
I've been trying to,
Total?
convince some people to do something like that.
Well, I think what I'm
it's trying to objectify.
That's a long-range project.
we could try to what will it actually do.
Six?
Mm-hmm.
Is that right?
Douglas doesn't think I turned them in.
I keep,
Because you write so small.
Oh, I can write Lukey.
So since it kind of came up, I'll ask a question for Doug, I guess. The Drainage 4 project that we did, started last year. One part of that was for them to review our current ordinances as far as drainage. Is that ever gonna happen? Or
yes, they're doing that now. Yep.
for maintenance too.
Maintenance, yep.
That's still in
They did a draft presentation last night, if you wanna watch that, if you get.
Yeah, they
I had
talked
to
about,
watch last night's meeting.
they kind of, they're pretty much down to the end. So they're doing that part, those two aspects now. We actually have talked to them, Sandy, about exactly your point of, does it make sense to require them to be low? If the road is low?
We need zones.
Yeah.
There's zones for that. I don't need somebody in the house on the hill making it higher.
Okay. Total, Weston Sampson 417, Seaman and Whiteside 406. So fairly close. And I can tell you when they're that close, we could either engage kind of top scorer solely and only. We could engage both kind of at the same time about pricing. Could go either way with that. Do you all have a preference on who we contact in terms of negotiating a cost? Both or just the top responders?
Shoot, when you put it that way, let's go both.
I think they're both very qualified.
Yeah.
They both
Yeah,
have
if they're, I mean, the scores kind of bear that
They're
out. that
Very similar. The structures are slightly different, which was a little concerning with Western Sampson just because of their CSC, who, far more familiar with us. But, and of course, then you go to Seaman Whiteside, and Ryan was just with Davis and Floyd for years. And so they've got a lot of familiarity with us. And, you could take, his hat may be new, but his knowledge is not.
Right.
Um,
I like the overall dynamic plan. Something that we can just reevaluate
Yeah.
every 5 to 10 years.
I think consensus, reach out to both of them, get pricing,
Yeah.
try to get pricing from both. Would you all be, I feel like a month to wait to actually make a recommendation. When council would be,
5/23, and that's the first hearing of the budget. First reading of the
Council would
budget
be-
and public hearing.
5/23?
Oh, no, that's the second reading of the budget, excuse me. Yes, 5/23. It's
Well,
second.
this is in this year's budget already, so.
Okay.
Would there be a willingness to meet? And if the meeting's 5/23, that packet would kind of go out the morning of 5/19. So would you all be available, assuming I can get pricing proposals back fairly quickly? Would you all be available, say, the 17th or 18th to make a recommendation?
I am out of town.
All next
12th
week?
through the 20th.
12th through the 20th? Okay.
We have,
Well, we were,
She is,
court on the 17th.
17th?
I don't know how long.
and I'm not here on the 18th. Not in the afternoon anyways.
I'm out on the 18th too.
Well, if we don't make it that week, then there's really, sounds like there's enough conflict that week doesn't work, so then that gets us, the quickest that council would approve it, if we don't do it next week, would be at the end of June. So the kind of pressure's off if we don't meet next week. Do we just do it at your June regular meeting?
What is so it's just to compare the
Prices.
potentially negotiated fee?
Right.
Do we have to meet to,
Well, you do have to make a recommendation, so that requires a motion and a vote.
yeah?
Yeah, I mean,
I mean, we
I
can
don't
make
think-
17th if you just do it at 5, that would be.
well,
Can we
we've
make
got,
a
I think-
motion to go with the low fee?
Didn't you say you don't have to go with the low fee on this sort of thing?
yeah, you don't have to.
But can we do that now? And then we don't have to.
I mean,
meet?
are you, if, I guess I think what I'm hearing you say is that the scoring, and it kind of bears out that it's
Tight enough that it's.
tight enough that you all would ultimately recommend whichever of the two is less expensive?
I'd like to make a motion to recommend the firm that negotiates the most economical fee next week.
Wow. Lowest.
Marty
bidder.
doesn't mess around.
Does anyone
Suzanne.
have a second?
Well, I'll
Waiting
second
for,
it.
we have
For
so discussion.
So generally, and Marty would be sensitive to this as an engineer. I mean, we try to not go on lowest fee.
Right.
We try to go on best qualified. in my personal opinion, your scoring has shown that this group is generally thinking that they're pretty much equally qualified, and you'd be happy with either. So I think that's, I mean, I
So,
think that's.
you know, one of the things not on the questionnaire or the scoring sheet was each firm's familiarity with the island, which we've talked about with previous selections. I don't know how much Seaman Whiteside has done with us. Obviously, Davis employed a lot. CSC has done a lot, not necessarily. But with that, you know, because I just hate picking somebody because they're the cheapest.
Well, I think what everybody said is true, and there's probably a follow-on study or so that comes out of this that's more robust and data intensive, and I think for what we have at hand right now, they're both well qualified.
Yeah.
That's my opinion. But I will say I won't be heartbroken if we wait a month. I'm just trying to find a way to get it done.
But are they? You know, what's
I'll tell you, just kind of thinking out loud, I would, in my personal opinion, if there was a wide disparity in cost, to me, that makes it a simple choice, and I think I know what you all would do. I guess the challenge would be if they come back and the costs are
as close to the
Are
scores?
close.
as close as the score, does that then come back to you?
Yeah.
I guess I would think that it should, that, you know, if one is
Yeah.
$1,000 difference, and then that kind of,
Did we go with the score?
how
Even
about
though
that?
it was close. Well,
If the pricing is within $5,000, it comes back to you.
Yeah.
Does that sound
Is
reasonable?
that an amendment to the motion?
I can't do that?
Move to amend whatever Doug just said.
There you go. I'll second that.
If it's close, Marty's against it. Marty's just, whoever's cheapest, he's going with.
No, that's fair. I mean,
Okay.
I'm not really passionate about it either way.
All right,
Okay.
so then let me try to put this, so I can
I'll
listen to.
withdraw my second so Marty can make another motion.
Well, let me try, let me see if I can
Or
figure it
whatever's
out, so we can
procedurally
see if this goes,
correct.
but if the bids come back and they are within $5,000,
They
Douglas
come
is to
back.
bring them back to you for, otherwise, he goes with the lowest bidder.
Correct.
Is that correct?
Correct.
Is that a fair motion?
Yes.
Do you want to withdraw, and then we'll just do that one?
I withdraw my motion.
All right. And you already agreed to withdraw your second, so is that good? Okay, all right.
Yes.
So now, Marty, you want to make the motion of what I just said, is that fair, that if the bids come back,
What she said.
if the bids come back less than $5,000 in difference, they're to come back to planning commission for further consideration, otherwise they go with the lowest bidder.
Okay, let me try this.
Okay, good,
I'd like
please.
to make
Repeat
a
after me.
motion. If the price negotiations are tighter than a $5,000 differential disparity, then we reevaluate and it comes back to the group. Otherwise, if they're outside of that band, we award to the lowest responsive.
Second.
A motion and a second. Anybody dare step on that and talk some more? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
No opposed, so it's unanimous.
Or however you want to word that.
Just for a thought,
They
If
just
the-
watched us make that motion and now they're.
I know, I'm stray thought, just speaking off the top of my head. If they are so darn close and there isn't that wide delta, and do we really want it to come back to us to reevaluate? Or do we want to basically just go with the high number? Not the high number.
Oh, if
for
it's
our
within
evaluation.
5,000.
High score.
If you're
High
saying if it's
score.
within 5,000, go with the higher
We've
score.
already kind of voted that, here's the number, it's so close, they're all so, I feel they're either ix-nix. I really don't want to see it again. Let's move forward is kind of why I'm
Yeah.
saying what I'm saying.
As you're looking around.
That way it's dealt with either way.
It's dealt with either
Either
way,
way.
exactly.
Did you, I think I heard the amendment to the motion.
Yes.
That we
Oh,
just
here
passed.
she goes. I knew she
But
couldn't,
you've already,
she couldn't take
you've already
it.
I know, but you've already voted, so.
Okay, all
I'm not,
right.
I mean,
Can we take another vote? Or make?
yes,
Yeah.
you could make another motion. I'm just trying to decide if that undoes, I mean, it effectively undoes the first one.
I've
if
been
you're-
burned twice on this, so I'm not
I
doing
don't-
it again.
I feel like I gotta.
Why don't we just leave it the way it is?
Because it
Well, then
may
it could
come
come
Because
Because
that
it
means
makes
it
a
comes
difference.
back and we
Yeah.
have to,
If it comes back.
I mean, that is a totally, he's told us, well, actually yours did say it would come back.
So, okay, so then after further discussion, another motion was made, and it just undoes it, so make a new motion.
So
Somebody.
And
do we have
it's,
to move to reconsider the first one and vote it?
After
David,
further
please,
discussion.
please.
I don't know how much time you want, have you spent reading this little book right
We
here?
follow that loosely, I think is how they say it in school districts.
So it's Marty's original motion plus, well, it's slightly modified to say, if the disparity is less than 5,000, the planning commission recommends approval of the highest score getter,
which is, we can name it.
which
right?
is Weston and Sampson.
Yeah. That's my motion.
Second. Anybody?
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Any discussion? No, so, all those in favor?
Aye.
Passed unanimously again.
That was complex, but you got something dealt with already
Yeah, we
for
dealt.
next month, so that was good work.
You
Well,
guys
yeah,
wanna come in and
we
show
don't-
council how to do that?
That was our pep talk.
That was a fa-
So we're no longer the Lutners. We've got a spot.
This is not what's in school.
All right, so next on your agenda is the, and it was, I think this is the longest packet that you've ever had, 140 some odd pages, but, and kind of buried in the middle, because it's in the middle of the agenda, is one page dealing with recommendations for short-term rentals. This is the task that city council has given to you all. At your last meeting, you looked at 5. You struck 2 of them. I was tasked with reaching out on one of them about the requirement to post a license number, which I did, and I've sent you all the response from Rentalscape, our software provider, and they did confirm that having the listing, the license number included in their listing is very helpful in their work of trying to tie a listing without an address to an owner. When they have our permit list, our rental license list, and their software, that is a component that makes that easier for their back end. And we do actually see quite a few incorrectly tied together, so maybe it would help them do that. So we've done, I would say that we've done our kind of work on the number 3, on the license number being included in the ad. That leaves number 2, which was require a minimum of 3 nights stays. And then I think we left the last meeting with some questions about number 1, and that's specifically this idea of limiting the occupancy of newly constructed or substantially reconstructed homes or homes that have allowed their license to lapse for more than a year to 8 people. So that's kind of my overview of where I think you all left the discussions last month. We were going to see if any other thoughts bubbled up and things that you might want to recommend, or if there's anything I left off the list.
On 1, so you said excluding children, since we defined that as 2 currently, I think we were talking about 12, or
Raising the age to 12.
12.
I had notes that the age was in question is too young. Did we agree on 12?
I don't know if we really agreed on it. I know we discussed it. That's why I was kind of,
Yeah, I also
I
had
thought
notes
that
that
was, I agreed with it.
you're- before we get to that one, how about, can we,
Well, the current code is what?
2? We exclude 2. Oh, the
That,
new, and then back to occupancy, the way we figure occupancy? Or just
occupancy
age?
in general, for age of children that are excluded.
Children less than 2 currently. And then
So-
occupancy is a pretty complex.
Would this, if we change this to 12, is that inconsistent with the rest of the code, or that would also go to 12?
Yes, that is, that 12 figure, I'm sorry, the 2 requirement is in this section, so it would be changed throughout the code from
12-year-olds.
2-year-olds to 12-year-olds.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's appropriate,
How about to just kind of,
although they're the ones playing Marco Polo.
was there,
And driving golf carts.
As they shouldn't be.
am I safe to assume that there is consensus on requiring the license number? To me, that one seemed easy, and
Yes.
Sure.
I think there was generally consensus that requiring a minimum of 3-night stays, I think there was consensus there, was that, am I correct in that? And does that only,
I think it varies. I can see, houses seasonal to be weekly. I can't see condos
Hmm.
being weekly, because they're smaller places.
So we're not limiting seasonally or otherwise. We're simply saying a 3-night minimum across the board, all condos, all houses, all hotel rooms,
Yes.
everything.
yep, that's the way it's written now.
I
So
think that's a problem for hotels.
well, a hotel, yeah,
Motels and hotels.
I think
So,
hotels and condos
The
would be the same.
Boardwalk Inn, I do not believe,
Right.
has a minimum, and I think they probably do some in and out, one-night stuff with different conferences and conventions. I'd hate to,
I don't think they would fall into the ranks of this, though.
that would be my, I'm not positive the wording on that, but I would agree that,
they get a rental license?
they do have a rental license. They have
Are we
the,
excluding them then?
so Boardwalk Inn is one owner, one operation. They have one hotel business license. The 2 establishments on the front beach are individually owned, so each of those rooms has its own short-term rental license. So we would have to figure a way to differentiate. When I was thinking of this, I was not thinking of this applying to the structures that were built specifically as hotels, which are those 2 in the front beach and Boardwalk Inn.
So there is not a minimum night stay currently in
No.
effect?
No.
Okay.
It's left owner to owner.
I know we do sea cabins 2-night minimum, and that's your Friday and Saturday
Exactly,
night.
that's what I was just going through in my mind.
And, some of the single rooms in the Mariners Walk, Seagrove, they all have 1-bedroom units, Portical. We do some of those 2-night minimum. Actually, we do a lot of the smaller units, just because they're smaller, in Wild Dunes at 2-night minimums. I can see a 3-night minimum. I'd love to be able to exclude condos, basically, and have it in houses. I think that makes a lot more sense.
So how-
Economically, it makes sense for owners to be more at a 3-night minimum.
So I guess I'm trying to think, and I'm hearing what's being said, and I'm trying to think of how you kind of define that in the code, what the differentiating, kind of how we draw that line. I was thinking if it's, so currently our building code is you have one code that applies to 1 and 2 family dwellings, so a duplex or a single-family home. You then have the building code that applies to everything else. So does that sound like a reasonable, we apply it to 1 and 2 family dwellings?
Oh, yeah.
Anything else and that's, again, kind of how the commercial code works. If it's anything other than a 1 or 2 family dwelling, the commercial code is the controlling document. We definitely differentiate those structures in my office because it's a whole different pool of contractors that have to work on them and everything else. So we're accustomed to that kind of framework. Does that?
So in
that
essence,
work?
we're trying to apply this 3-night minimum only to single-family
Homes and duplexes.
residences. Yeah. I just don't think, I mean, sure, whatever, I guess, but at that, I don't think it's going to achieve the intended result. For those blowout parties or the high disturbance, incidents, I think that people are going to shell out the money at the large house for 3 nights or whatever our minimum is and still cause a problem. So I'll get behind this if it's good for the group,
You
but
don't necessarily correlate
kind
a
of on the
one-night
fence
rental
on
to a blowout. In your mind, you don't correlate the issue to the duration of the rental, I think is what you're saying. It's not,
I just don't think this 3-night
It's
minimum
less-
is going to change
Let me
that.
say it this way. It's probably, I'm not an expert in this, but it's probably more of a challenge for somebody to rent for 3 nights and to have that unrestricted behavior going on versus, a 1-night or a 2-night in a home.
I mean, I get it. I get the theory. My hypothesis is that's not gonna
agree.
that's not gonna deter it. If we're talking about an ill intention like that, then an extra night or two of cost burden is not gonna.
Well, probably money's no object either, because it's everybody putting their allowance together.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. So I mean,
I kind of have a feeling it's going to hurt some of the people that only rent occasionally, that may even only rent, on a weekend or something. Not looking like, again, all the people are going through the rental houses, but you've got a lot of people that, I guess 4% of people that normally live in their house and only want to rent it out part-time, then you're kind of limiting those people. And I'm not sure, I'm kind of weighing the odds of, are we going to solve an occasional blowout party and in effect hurt us several people from being able to make, rent out on a weekend?
yeah, if Marty's point of
And
it
then if we go down to a
doesn't
2-night, then it becomes
impact
even
anything,
worse.
all it does is,
Well, have you slowed down the, to your point, the desirability of some of these properties for a party with a 3-night minimum? Have you managed the in and out of the property with a 3-night minimum, which I find some residents feel is disruptive, the constant
And that's another
turnover.
benefit to doing the 3-night.
The traffic is somewhat limited in terms of, one couple in for 2 nights, another couple in for 2 nights, and that's not how it normally is, but there's the potential. So for 3 nights, at least I feel we're starting to kind of erode some of those issues.
my
Traffic.
opinion is no, but
Yeah.
I'm not diametrically opposed. I understand your point, but I don't think that you're going to see the
Sandy, are you,
effect.
in your opinion, dealing with it your whole life, I mean, do you feel like it does create some barriers to those things? Or are you more,
I think that there will be, yes, I think that neighbors will feel more comfortable with someone there 3 nights versus 2 nights. If that would be my point. I mean, there are those that don't want any. I get that. I understand. But I don't think that's where we're going right now.
But I mean, think about how you vacation. There's a different vacation when you're going somewhere for a weekend might be a little bit more of an intense rest than staying somewhere for a week where you don't have to do everything all in 2 nights. And so the longer stay, I would tend to think would calm the people down. Not to say I haven't heard enough Friday night woo-hoos on their last blowout night, but certainly a 2-night stay. Somebody's coming in Friday, they're checking out Sunday. They're gonna just blow it out and have fun, because that's what I would do for a 2-night.
Surprised it's the
yeah.
last night. I would have assumed it was the first night.
It's always
That's
the
when
first
the
night.
first night's when they're testing their speakers.
Wow.
That's when I test back. I have much worse music.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't want to belabor it. That's my opinion. I think it's a waste of ink on paper to try to do this, but
Well, I don't think you see a lot of people checking in on Friday and checking out on Sunday at larger houses.
You
So
don't.
I kind of
And
agree
so it's
with
kind of
Marty.
addressing the point of they're moving in for longer than 2 nights
Mhm.
typically.
But I guess, within the
Do we need a
condos-
regulation for it, to Marty's point? Probably not.
can we put it to a
That's-
vote? We have 6 people up here, so, or no, 5.
Five, yeah.
Yeah, we lost one.
Aren't you an engineer?
I'm just not good at counting. I can add things together, but.
All right, why don't you all give a show of hands if you're in favor of a three-night minimum stay at 1 and 2 family dwellings?
And this is as a recommendation to council, correct?
Correct.
No hard feelings for anybody who disagrees, all right?
No hard feelings.
It's really not a big deal.
I'm in favor of 3 nights for single-family homes.
I kind of am too.
I'm indifferent, so I just,
So when in doubt, keep your hand down.
I can agree to let council decide.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I'll do. 'Cause I don't know if it makes a hill of beans.
Was that a yay vote?
That's the
I think we have 3
All right, that was-
yeses.
All right. You guys are.
No, I would go no if I had to make a decision.
Oh, come on.
I can be Clarence Thomas now.
So it's not a motion as much as it
Yeah.
is just a loose
Recommendation.
recommendation.
Right.
Yeah, it's a recommendation. All of these will be recommendations. Okay, so I'm gonna keep that on the list as a check. Last one, and this one has, so again, and to kind of just talk a little bit more about this one, the way that ordinance currently works is a newly constructed house that's never had a license for the property before is limited to 12. If there was a license in the year 2010, the occupancy of that newly constructed house would be either the occupancy at 2010, which in some cases is 20, or it's 12. That's the way it is now. What's on your plate for consideration is every new constructed house goes to 8. If you substantially improve your house, it goes to 8. Or if you allow your license to lapse, it goes to 8. So it's not only a drop from 12 to 8, but it's more catches in the, so more frequently licenses would drop. This one I will say it was, I don't know that there was consensus on this. And the other part of this is currently we exclude any person under 2 years old. In here, we've talked about making it an exclusion for anybody 12 or younger. How do we feel about that?
I'd go back to 2.
Go back to 2?
Again, it's presumption of behavior by increasing the age of the children. We're thinking that we're encouraging families. Don't know if that's really adequate or true or not. It's, and I don't know what we can, what it would do to future rental aspirations if you could rent to only 8 people. Then it comes down to enforceability. I'm sure there are a lot of people out there that would just say, well, it says 8, but come on.
So you bring up an interesting point. I have to ask the question, you're in the license renewal process. Approximately where are you with what is being renewed right now?
So I would guess we have 1,300 or so applications. I think we've processed about 900 of them now. So and ultimately, I mean, this past year, the number, so that's kind of the way it goes. You know, it's a quick first couple of months, majority of folks renew, and then for the next 11 months, it kind of slowly ticks up. This past year, it was to 1791. We don't know if this next year will be higher or lower than that. But it's kind of the pattern we would expect it to. So it would, this process, and I guess the way it's written is it would only affect people or properties as they either let it lapse or took on a major construction project. So it would not impact anybody whose license is issued or about to be issued. It would only affect those that either didn't renew it for longer than a year or rebuilt their rental house or built a brand new house. So the pool of properties affected, it's not a, it's probably 3, 4, 5 a year. It's not huge impact on widely across the entire pool.
And of the homes built, we had asked this before, how many how many building permits were issued last year, I guess? I gotta go all the way, I guess, to 22. Was it 50 building permits?
Yeah, I think a little under that. Yeah, and I think historically, newly constructed houses have not gotten a license. They haven't rented. My sense is that that's changed a little bit in the last year or so, and we have not done the analysis of this most recent year. My sense is that I think I know of 2, if not 3, that were definitely rentals. So my sense is that number went up a little bit at least, but it was a very, very low number prior. So
again, for the most part, the majority of the homes being built, let's say 40 out of the 50 are residents. If not more.
Yeah, that had been the pattern.
And that was 2021's pattern.
Right.
And 22's pattern.
Correct.
Even with occupancy being limited at 12. So by putting it down to 8 for new construction, what are we doing? What are we fixing?
To me, the most impactful part of that provision is the reconstruction, because we have had, and it's actually become an issue in this kind of within this last year, a house completely torn down, rebuilt, brand new house. The community has heard that new homes are limited to 12. They kind of are starting to see, well, wait a minute, this is advertising for 20. It's a new home, it should be back to 12. And it's kind of this, it's not a loophole. It was intentionally written the way it was written. But the community expectation that anything newly constructed goes to 12. And that's not how the code is written. So it's a little bit of it is public perception of.
So what I was trying to do, I felt like back when we were talking about caps and proposals to the council, was to roll back on those 12-plus occupant homes, so that if they ever changed or lost their license, that they would roll back to 12.
Yeah.
And then we had 8 in our zone 1, 2, and 3 for the inner island residents, which was basically, that's a 3-bedroom home. I'm not necessarily in favor of 8 across the board for all of the island, but I am in favor of 12 on that rollback scenario. If you don't keep your license active for, you don't renew your license, short of some sort of, dire disaster that you couldn't, then you should roll back, in my opinion, to 12. I don't think 8, and arguably 12 doesn't do much, but those big homes, if they lose their license, what's going on? They're turning into a second home, they're turning into a residence. Yay. I think that's what we want in the community. We don't want it to be grandfathered in forever with 20 rental and occupancy of 20 forever, in my opinion.
So, and I guess I would, thinking about what you're saying, I guess I would want to correct what I just said, in that the pool could be, with that rollback provision, that would be more impactful than what I was just saying of only a handful. I think that probably is, 20, 30 properties a year that used to be a rental. Somebody's coming back, trying to kind of come back on the rental program. That would be a bigger net, a larger net that would be cast.
When we were looking through the data, when I was looking through all the data, there was probably, I'd say 15 to 20 homes that between, what did we go back to, 2012? Between 2012 and 2020 that had dropped off the market for at least a year or two.
Right.
And then came back on the market as a
14,
rental
16, or
in the same
18.
range.
Yeah.
So only 12 in 10 years or so. So maybe.
I wasn't particularly looking for it.
Yeah.
There was several, when I was comparing data, just caught my eye. And then I kind of looked, and like I said, rough estimate, maybe 20, 30 homes
20.
that had fallen in that the last 8 years, where they'd gone off the market, then came back on the market.
I do think just, handling the regulation, it does seem a little counterproductive or counterintuitive to explain to people, well, we're gonna look, somebody comes into my office, I'm thinking of buying this property, how many people can it have? And we say, well, we're gonna go look back in the 2010 records and see what its status was 13 years ago. It's a little bit.
Well, I think the
Seems-
concern when all that happened was if a house got destroyed, but nothing's stopping you from continuing your license. It'll cost you a little bit, but continuing license while the house is being rebuilt. I guess that's a question. I know. Can you get a license if the house is not occupable?
I think we did talk about that, and the intention would be that we would write it to explain that you could, if some natural disaster, something kept you
Yeah,
from
if your
being
house
able to
burned
rent
down
it. Yeah,
completely.
and that's
and it took
not
you a year to
unusual.
build it.
Some kind of circumstance kept you from being able to rent it. I think we'd have to clarify, you could get your license
Reinstated at
Reinstated.
that occupancy level. And not roll back to 12. That was the one that I thought was, going back to 2010 and everything being grandfathered, whether it's rented or not, does not make sense to me. I would like to have a rollback, quite frankly, and that's what I thought we were addressing here. The 8 came up, I know, as a result of our proposal to the city for the interior community of the island, on the residents there, thinking, let's stop the incentive for buying the inner island properties
Mm-hmm.
and licensing those for rent.
I definitely agree with the 8 inner island. I'm beachfronted. I have no issue with it being 12.
Well, and I'm saying not 8, I'm saying 12 across the board. Keep 12, but have that rollback provision for those 16, 14, 16, 18 occupied homes right now.
So are we talking about two
The-
different things?
Two different things here, yeah.
We're trying to roll too much into one package like the federal government.
So I guess that's the first question is, are we all in agreement with the rollback being changed to?
So basically, stop the grandfathering of 2010 and
Yes.
not stop it, but honor it till such time as you don't renew your license.
Or you build a new house, or you reconstruct your house. Any one of those triggers, you come into compliance with what, and I will also clarify, we have, that it goes to 8. It would only go to 8 if the formula, the occupancy formula, it would max out at 8. So if you have a 2-bedroom house, it's 2 per bedroom plus 2 or 6,
Well,
or
8's
12.
8's basically a 3-bedroom house with a sleeper sofa is the way I mentally think
Right.
about 8. Just talking.
So I think there's consensus on rolling back, kind of doing away with the grandfathering. And I think that leaves you all with the question of 8 across the board, 12 across the board. I think I personally I would think that going back, I mean, the 8 on the backside of the island made sense when we were creating the map that was creating the line that distinguished the backside of the island. So I guess I would hate to create a new map solely to create the line of 12 versus 8. So I guess my request would be that you decide on one of the two
Well, I
numbers.
think that we just caveat it. I think, yeah, we have to do that. We have to delineate something if we're gonna introduce this 8 versus 12.
I think we stay at 12 then.
12 and 2.
With a
kids.
caveat.
Kids up.
Kids under 2.
Kids under 2.
There you go.
It's either 8 people and
I didn't
kids
follow
under
your
12, or 12 people and kids under 2.
Yeah, I think that was kind of like, again, I kind of view the 12 adults in a house is going to be disruptive.
Well, that's 6.
And under most
6
cases.
Well, I look at it, because
Yeah.
I always ponder who's paying for all this. So I assume,
Grandparents.
well, or
Well.
it could be, and they get the master. But, to afford these $20,000 a week rentals, or whatever they might be, it's not the 12-year-old kid he's ponying up. And if you had a family with 4 kids and you're trying to get 2 bedrooms or 3 bedrooms, your share is incrementally getting larger, and is that, and if you're stuck to 8 people, it's a smaller pool yet again, 8 assuming adults
Yeah.
to participate,
When
and
we-
maybe that's not really a
So
concern.
could
how
we,
they're paying for this.
I think I'm hearing David say 8. I think I'm hearing Sandy say 12. And David, your 8 was with,
Well, that was kind of a consensus to get to go, if you drop to the 8, then you raise the age limit
So
so
it's-
that a family
it's 8,
would be.
it's 8, but excluding
Kids under 12.
kids under 12, or it's leave it at 12 excluding kids under 2.
I have is that, it's leaving it at 12 with kids under 2. Now you're just bringing you're bringing a crib or whatever those pack and plays.
It's not an actual bed.
You're not bringing an actual bed. When you change it to 8 and 12 and under, that complicates things as a rental manager, honestly.
It might still be a 6-bedroom house, though.
But it's rated at 8.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
So
We might
you're-
have some 6-bedroom houses, for rent,
Well, I think
licensed for 8.
I think it complicates it for the enforcement.
Right.
If you keep it simple, it's mom, dad, and the 4 kids are what are going to fit into an 8 now. And the 2-year-old is in a pack and play.
Doesn't need a bed.
Doesn't need the bed. But if you leave it kind of blind for it's 8 plus, how many kids do you have under 12? See what I'm saying?
Mhm.
Now you're bringing two couples, 4 adults, and, you know, each kid, you know, each of the family's kids plus their friends. I mean, you might have a 10-bedroom
Right.
house with the softball team.
All right, Marty, I can always count on you for quick and easy. Are you team 12 excluding 2? Or are you team 8 excluding 12 and under?
I think the age restrictions is dicing it up too much. I mean, quite frankly, I see violations all the time across the street. You said the key word enforcement, so we're talking about 2-year-olds and 12-year-olds here. Like, what's our enforcement strategy for any of this?
Yeah.
How are we gonna regulate little kids?
Get them driver's license.
And it doesn't even matter, so I'd say 8.
8 occupants of 8 count excluding 12 and less.
I mean, if we're gonna affect more change, if that's the intention of some of these, you know, imposed new ordinances, then I'd say that's probably the way to shoot high on this one,
Ron,
without any age
occupancy limit of 8
differentials.
or 12? Or do we want to, I mean, we have a lot on our plate. We don't have to solve this tonight.
Well, I think it'd probably be, you know, Sandy and I would go down, I would probably defer to 12 people and kids under 2. Just, I mean, I'd love to be able to split the island like we did before, but that's never proves to work.
Right.
So, you know, 8 would certainly solve the problem in my neighborhood, but is it gonna really wreck the market in our little golden goose that pays for a lot of this island stuff, you know, along Palm Boulevard and Ocean Boulevard?
But are they gonna lapse in there?
Well,
Yeah, that's where it
that's,
comes
I
from.
guess, the other part of it is that it wouldn't be any new ones. What exist.
Well, and then we have word like substantially reconstructed home. You know, so somebody wants to add on to their house or renovate it, you know,
So,
and so then they're no longer gonna have their 12, they're gonna be at 8. And what my thinking is, there are a lot of older homes on the island. Heck, people
Yeah.
are tearing down homes that are 10 years old to put up new homes. But there are a lot of homes that are 40 and 50 years old that need
Mark.
some work.
But
And not everybody wants to tear them down, but still, there's no difference between tearing it down and making a substantial improvement.
so I have just kind of, you know, and spinning this through my head. I, again, was kind of focusing on this rollback, newly constructed houses, reconstructed houses. But I guess this wrinkle of changing the exclusion from 2 to 12 years old has the effect across the entire pool of rentals of no longer, you basically have stopped counting kids between 8 and 10. So I guess the net result of that recommendation would actually be an increase in occupancy across the pool of rentals, which that might be counter to what you all are thinking about. I don't think we could have a situation where we're excluding 8-year-olds for new houses and including 8-year-olds for old houses. We could not have a world where we
Okay,
are
let's throw out the
Right,
8,
let me-
leave the 2-year-olds. Just
Yeah.
go 8 and 12.
I don't know what an
Let's just
8-year-old
go-
looks
let's
like.
look- make
I want to
simplify.
paint a picture for you that just kind of came into mind, that to your point, increased occupancy. If 8's the limit and everyone under 12 is excluded, meaning you can bring all the
Class.
1 to 12-year-olds you want.
Sam's 5th grade class can come.
Your 8 adults is 4 couples with 3 kids, all under the age of 12, in a house.
Now you're showing.
How many bedrooms is that?
Right.
That's like 8, 9, 10 bedroom house. So I
Okay.
could do that. That's my fear
Well,
with
okay.
with allowing that age limit.
I'm fine with throwing out the age. I thought that was kind of like a compromise to me.
And
from
it's
8 to 12.
impossible to enforce. I mean, you
Yeah.
could tell a 2-year-old from any
Yeah,
other
the-
age,
The
but you
officer
can't.
has a hard time counting.
Are you
that.
12? Are you 13? You know, it's like,
Well, yeah.
you have no idea.
So I think what I'm hearing David say is he's staying with 8, but excluding 2 and under. Marty, does that change? You had kind of said go with 8.
Sure, I'm still there, yeah.
So Ron, I think I heard you say 12.
12 with 2 and under.
Suzanne, no pressure. We might have to come back when. Is just Jeff?
Yeah.
Only
Because
Jeff
we're
is new.
interviewing admin's meeting next week to talk to more people for candidates.
What's your feeling? 12 or 8 for lapsed, reconstructed, and newly constructed? 8. That's barely a consensus. Do we want to stick with it? It could, I guess we'll.
Could you take out the substantially reconstructed and just leave it at new homes
Or lapsed.
or lapsed?
I don't
Because
know.
that gets back to what you were pointing out. If somebody wants to severely remodel their
Well, I mean,
16-bed
there's
rental
severely
home.
renovated homes or substantially and I'm doing
Yeah.
2 right now.
Yeah.
And yes, that should be our clock reset for sure, but, you know, if I was doing, I renovated a home recently, well, last year before, on Forest Trail, not on the rental market. It wasn't really it was bedroom addition, yeah, we put on a new roof, maybe added a new front porch. That's not, I mean, that would by definition probably be considered substantially reconstructed, but it's really, you know, more of a refresh.
But that wouldn't extend past a year, would it?
What, the construction time?
Yes.
Oh, with me building, yes, but that's not the point. The point is,
No.
regardless, it
Well-
doesn't have to be,
I don't
it's
know
not
why
the
you-
loss of
why you have a
license.
year- Why you're thinking in terms of that's not a year.
It's-
You
it
should be able to
toggles
get
with
your
the-
license.
We generally do not issue licenses to things under construction, anything without a CO. We do not issue licenses to. But I
if
think we would
that
write.
pushes you past your deadline.
Yeah, we
I
would have
think
to
you
write
have
that.
some
I think that's an
issues.
understanding, and we would write that in, but in our current
we have to.
mode of operation, we don't issue licenses to structures without a CO.
Which,
But
you know,
we'll-
it could be how you define substantially reconstructed home. Because a minor renovation does not generally get a CO, you get a final inspection, but the power is not cut off.
Isn't there a percentage attached
Yeah,
to that? Like
50% or more.
50%.
You reconstruct it
Do it
for,
my way, in my thinking.
So, yeah.
Because when you renovate, my major renovations, the meter was pulled. And so, yes, I will need to have William come out and bless everything before somebody remembers to call Dominion to put the power back on.
15% of what?
But other homes that
50.
were, you know, doing some nice modifications, that could be 50% of the value. that the
50.
meter's not
Of
pulled.
the value.
if you
As determined by-
reconstruct market value, the value of your reconstruction exceeds half the market value of the building.
How do we determine market value?
Either an appraisal or the county's
Oh,
assessment.
Lord, have mercy, appraisers. Okay, sorry. Thanks for that clarification.
All right. There's consensus at 8 and leaving it at 2. We don't have one member, so this, I mean, I don't think you, unless you all are at a point where you want, I think you would look at this one more
I
time
think we
anyway.
should.
So let's leave it at that for tonight. It'll come back at your next meeting with an even number of participants to make it even more
Well,
complicated.
Actually, if the administration's supposed to meet next Tuesday.
You could
So
have a
they
new
could say-
member.
You could have a new member.
Could
by
have
then.
a-
Yeah, by the next.
Could have an odd number.
That poor person.
I mean, this,
The intent of what we're doing basically is to dissuade people investing or renting long-term with a short-term license, meaning buying into the community simply to rent. is what I'm thinking. Am I wrong? Is that what?
I'm looking at more from like just a disruption in the neighborhood and the number of people. That, again,
That's
you put
what- yeah.
12 people in a house opposed to 8 people in a house, which one's gonna be more disruptive to a neighborhood?
But the longer goal in my mind is to make it less attractive so that doesn't happen. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Is to make the neighborhoods more stable or appear to be, as opposed to the appearance now for some is that it's not safe because I could have a vacation rental.
Well, I think that's what we're seeing on Palm is it's not affordable to rent to 12 people, to build a house that you can rent to 12 people on Palm Boulevard. It's, so that, what's happening is
They're being bought and
they're
converted.
being bought further into the island and now renting to 12 people. Because you can still afford to do that.
Now only rich people are buying.
Yeah.
They don't live there.
Right.
They're second homes.
Their second home, so,
Yeah, I mean, it all
Yeah.
goes back to the livability. I mean,
but
David's point was valid. I don't think it goes any further than that. I mean, there's things that are, will come in time with that, but I think it's all about the smaller groups, not limiting the disturbance, simply put. Just
And I guess, Sandy,
Yeah,
your
that's-
point is, over the long term, making investment, pure investment, less attractive over time.
Exactly.
And-
That's
and
kind
less-
of what my motivation is in terms of what I'm suggesting
To kind of push,
and questioning.
kind of dampen that.
I think that
Will
that
it,
mark.
will it ever stop? I don't want it to stop. I mean, it can slow down certainly with the numbers, and I think we're seeing the market do that.
Yeah.
And your numbers are probably gonna come in a lot less than 1,700. We were at 1,400 when we started talking. You're going to be even less than that when you're all done with probably this year. Or maybe they'll be around 1,400
Yeah.
at the end of the year. But there's not an incentive because of the price points of our real estate right now. People are not able to buy these and justify paying $30,000 in rent, and $30,000 in taxes, and the cost of the vacation rental experience. Managing those properties is expensive. Electric, water, all the repairs, landscaping. You gotta have people do the yard for you. I mean, it's just the price of getting work done alone has gone up. Not to mention materials. Do you have any issues with material costs?
Anything, so we're kind of down to a list of 3. Anybody have any ideas of things to add to the list?
I have one
Okay.
that I wanted to add last time, but we're still talking about this next meeting though?
Yes,
Okay, well, something to chew on, I guess, for the month.
we'll put it on the list.
So, considering what council has been talking about with introducing new fire regulations to check the box to make sure that people are within compliance for fire code, I think that was the impetus for limiting or disallowing rental of a room in a person's house previously. And I think if we're going to introduce these new requirements, that should be reintroduced.
Allowing,
To allow it, yeah. Because the original ordinance, unless I'm missing something, was, no, they didn't want people to rent a room in their house because there was no way to ensure that it was compliant with the fire code.
yeah,
Now we're talking about getting a fire certificate or whatever, so I think it's just fair to bring that back to the table.
so, it was more, the fire code was a component of it, and nothing that's being done now would really change, structural kind of fire separation between units, which I think is what you're getting at. But the other issue was, the zoning's definition of a family, that these are single-family houses, and a single-family house, and I think the definition includes no more than 6 people that are not
Four.
related, so,
Four not related.
or 4 not related. So we're already, not to say that it can't be done if that's the, but it's more than just the fire code that's keeping it currently from happening. But to Marty's point, other communities are actually not only allowing it, but they're actually only allowing it to be done in the city of Charleston if it's kind of part of your house, or the owner, they kind of have knowledge that the owner is on site. The city's, I think, philosophy on it is if the owner of the property is on site, those are the rentals that don't cause any problems, because the owner's going to deal with it. He's there. He's kind of sitting over he's keeping watch over the property because he's on site. So I think it's a valid thing for you all
That's
to
right. I mean, that's
consider.
what really supports it. The biggest reason we're in this debate for those who are against short-term rentals is the livability concerns. And so I think that makes it more manageable.
Adds another car.
Yeah, and I don't know how we get to it. I guess there would be a concern over, somebody buying a 5-bedroom house and kind of operating it as like a
bed and breakfast.
or hostel, where kind of it's just all the rooms are just kind of a revolving.
Well, you would only have one license per dwelling though.
So that would be the way to limit it, I guess.
Which is the way it is now, right? You couldn't have 2 licenses at a single-family house.
That's correct. Yeah.
So-
I guess we would have to clarify that your license, right now, your license is specifically for the dwelling unit. We'd have to button up that if it was a room, I think the intent would be that it only be one room,
Yep.
right?
I think we're talking about the 4%ers here, so I think it's a benefit to that group to offer that flexibility.
How big a bedroom, how many people you're putting in it?
Can we do ADUs?
Oh, Lord.
I did that on purpose, I'm sorry.
It's another trend, obviously. That's. How about we put it on the list? Talk about it next month, unless
Since Marty asked.
Something to chew on.
Something to chew on.
We can argue about it in June.
David, thoughts? Are you
I don't see any issues with it.
Okay.
Kind of trying to think it through.
okay?
of
I didn't know if there's any
if
immediate
there's-
resistance to putting it on the list. I was
Oh,
trying
no.
to gauge. Okay, everybody good with that? All right, we'll put that on the list for consideration. Anything else? Is that enough? It's almost 7.
That's enough.
I would just say that the draft of the comprehensive plan is in your packet. I feel like we made significant, so just to keep you apprised, we are accepting all of the previous changes and then highlighting only the changes that have been made since the last time you saw it. So, I feel like we had some comments from various folks. Sandy, your front page notes were a little cryptic.
Yes.
So yours have not been made. I think we have David, I know we have Suzanne's. I think some were, Elizabeth Campson sent in some good comments, and it was a good catch on, I think I pulled the wrong site and it was for census data. So there's a good catch there. So some comments there. So I would say we're not at a point to push that out the door just yet. So let's leave it on the agenda for June. We're continuing to kind of polish on it, and maybe June will be in a good position to make a recommendation. But if you have if you do have additional comments between now and June, please send them to us.
I will get you some, I promise.
Okay. Good.
When are we looking to meet in June?
Second Wednesday.
The 14th?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
I
Is that
am-
good?
No,
I'm
you're
not
not.
going to be here.
You can zoom in.
Even to save all those poor renters?
Save what for?
The 12.
They're very rich, actually.
Anybody else have a conflict? Sandy, do you mind that we meet? Would you like for us?
I
would
don't
you
mind
either-
you meeting.
You want to try to
and
Zoom
if
or
I
you?
could- If I could get a Zoom connection.
Okay, might be able to do it that way?
I'd
Okay,
Probably be able to.
okay. So let's just continue, let's plan to continue to meet on the 14th. That date will work well for,
Council.
yeah, getting a recommendation to council. So I wouldn't want to move it back too much.
Flag Day.
And it is Flag Day. And the Braves play the Tigers. That's what I see on my calendar.
Hey, you think they're gonna take the pennant this year?
Anybody
think
else
so.
want to do a motion before we talk baseball?
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor?
Discussion?
Discussion.
Don't forget the discussion part.
Not on that.
Don't want to adjourn.
Golly, it was cold in here tonight. It's
cold?
Oh, my goodness.
See, and I'm
Bring
roasting.
a shawl.
Well, you have a sweater on.
I know, but I've taken it on and off. I'm usually